Oh, hi. Nice to see you again. This is the latest episode of the UX Coach podcast, but you already knew that. This is the show that explores digital design and research careers with discussions with people from this incredible international community. In this episode, I'm in conversation with Miles Reiter. Miles is both UX designer and product manager at Bolstra, a Saas business that has developed a customer success management platform based out of Indianapolis in the United States of America. We got deep into what it's like being the first hire in a startup, and more than that, how to tell if you're geared up for the baptism of fire that comes with joining a startup straight out of school. Miles tells us about his degree in informatics and its potential for creating great digital products. We discuss our favourite reads of 2018 and other ways to seek advice and develop your skills when you are the design team of one. Before we get going today, I wanted to apologise for the audio quality in this episode. Working to find the schedules that work with our guests often means we have to take the calls outside of our studio space here in sunny Hove. Let's just say we're still learning, and I really hope that it doesn't distract you from what is really an insightful discussion. These things are going to happen. We're running this on a shoestring budget, so with this little bit of grovelling out of the way, let's just get on with the show. Miles, thank you very much for joining me today on the UX Coach podcast. Why don't you start off by telling us about yourself and what you're doing now?
Sure. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me on. I am currently a user experience and product management team of one at a company called Bolstra here in Indianapolis. We're a B2B startup in the customer success space, and I've been working on Bolstra for about a year and a half now, and officially on the team for somewhat less, maybe 8 months or so.
Right. So does that mean that you had originally started off as like freelancing for them?
Kind of. So my first job out of college was a kind of shared expense R&D company,
right?
That had essentially been spun out of another startup when they realized they had more developers than they had demand for development, and they were going through kind of a pivot. And the indie tech scene is extremely collaborative and close between the startups that are here. So they got in contact with people in their network and found someone with an idea who needed developers. So a company called North Quad emerged from that did the product for both Bolstra and Lumavate. My first job out of college, was working there as the UX designer for both.
Wow, that's got to be quite a challenge, isn't it, with sort of changing your mindset? I mean, were they working in similar spaces?
No, not at all. Lumavate was and is still in the progressive web app kind of visual builder / host and infrastructure space. Kind of enabling companies to get their product or get their idea for some kind of marketing campaign into a progressive web app with a quick turnaround time.
Right.
Right. Well, at least when I worked for them, it looked a lot like kind of a rapid fire agency kind of thing. They were doing kind of little websites as a service, leading up to when the visual designer was ready for prime time.
Right.
When these companies could come in and pick it up themselves. So there was some of that, and there was some of building out the visual designer itself and the infrastructure of the product to support that later on.
Right. So you're within the first couple of years of your commercial career, so to speak. What were you studying?
I studied informatics and media.
Okay, tell us about that.
So I really love to frame informatics, or at least the track I pursued of informatics, as anthropology through a technology lens.
Okay.
It's very much, for anybody who studies it, kind of more of a human side of computer science, the intersection of humans and technology, how we affect technology, how we design technology, and how technology in turn affects us, influences us, and that balance, that give and take.
Right.
And I pursued a very social informatics, kind of just anthropological look at that relationship.
So what was your final one? What was your sort of end project?
There wasn't. I didn't actually do an end project so much as I just did a write up, and then actually got my final credit for my first 3 months at work at Northquad.
Right.
As an internship.
Yeah.
Despite it being a salaried position out of school.
Right.
There was a lot of the HCI track within that degree. When I was there, they're building it out now, but there wasn't really a good design / human-computer interaction program at the undergrad level.
Mm.
But I got as much of it as I could. Touched on a class that was kind of a stripped-down version of the master's level program, which was that was really kind of the capstone experience for me. That was the last big, really directly applicable class I took before graduating, and it was very project based. Here's the prompts. Here's your team.
So quite closely modeling what you would sort of expect from a commercial environment.
Yeah, very much so.
What are the things that you've taken out of that, doing that degree, that have been immediately applicable? And are there any things which you have learnt from that you've been able to bring into it that you haven't seen anyone else doing?
Right. That's a great question. Giving myself some thinking time here.
Because it's quite a different, it's a very different road in to most people that I've spoken to. There's an awful lot of people who might have done some form of design, in a kind of more traditional sense. The media stuff for sure. HCI seems to be a really big sort of like common path in, and sort of, because it's the only touch point. Like you said, there's not a great deal out there that's kind of exploring the sort of the work in which we do in like user experience design or user research design. So I'm quite interested to sort of know how informatics is how you're leveraging that, how you're leveraging informatics into what you're doing day to day.
Yeah. I think one of the things that comes to mind, not necessarily the focus, but something that's certainly been helpful, is that while informatics is not the same level of depth, I guess, as computer science when it comes to software development and engineering, there were required classes on the technical side, some Python, some database design, touching on certain other things here and there, like C# in the context of building a VR experience, little one-off things like that.
Right.
And I think that little bit of technical background, enough development experience to be dangerous.
Yeah.
That's certainly been helpful in joining, but becoming part of a largely development-oriented team and being able to communicate with developers on the team and understand the technical structure of what we're doing.
Right, sure.
So that's one aspect. The other, I would be kind of tempted to go with the fact that it was just like I tried to make it a very diverse experience, exposing myself to a number of disciplines bordering or within technology. Just view things from multiple viewpoints and get an appreciation for that complex relationship. I was to back up a little bit, going into college, I was still running a little semi-hobbyist, semi-professional tech blog and YouTube channel, just covering consumer electronics and viewing that industry and how people viewed it, how the news media covered it, and just kind of being an observer of that space.
Mm.
So going into informatics, I kind of tried to take the same approach for looking at technology fields. Just be an observer, view it through as many different lenses as I can find. Like what are the ethical implications of cybersecurity practices or the lack thereof? what's the technical side look like? How are people thinking about problems in that space? Just very much grabbing all of the different perspectives I can and making myself kind of a student of just watching those and learning from the perspectives that are out there.
That kind of covers off one element of your job role then, of the kind of the research end. At some point in time, you have to make decisions about it. So the product manager side of things, I'm guessing, is where you're having to take some of those informed observations that you're gathering about the what you're building as a product in your audience, and then executing on it. Do you find that there's an inner conflict with the fact that you have to make decisions as being the product manager as well, and so you're losing that removal of personal bias from your research?
Kind of. So it's definitely there's complexity there, and there's a very much a need to always take the time to step back a little bit and try to examine biases I might have and how they might be affecting whatever bit of work I'm trying to drive forward or whatever thing I'm trying to design. But in many ways, I think that good product management is very close in my mind to what I always thought was part of design. So I never got exposed to product management as a discipline in school.
Right.
I came out and kind of became aware that was a thing, and all the responsibilities were always essentially what I viewed being part of designing, or at least part of getting something designed to market. I always kind of viewed it as design strategy or design through a wider angle lens. And I think that view of product management is very helpful if you're trying to do both roles, like thinking of it as really an extension of the same thing. That's part of it. The other part, I think, is that I see part of it as kind of design enablement,
right?
Playing politics almost, so to speak, to enable good design. Like as a user experience designer, I might want to fix these number of glaring heuristic issues right away, just take the entire product, take 6 months and do all of it at once and just get that out of the way, get that fixed up and move on to the next big effort. But as a product manager, those things aren't necessarily going to benefit sales or marketing. It's just a user-centric thing. So, like, in the interests of essentially sustainability as a company, to be able to continue to deliver positive outcomes for users, I have to kind of take a more modular approach, fix the things in this area while we're extending that area in ways that drive the product forward, then take the next and continue. Is that making any sense? Am I explaining that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking about my own sort of previous experiences with similar environments, and I feel like there is definitely some massive benefits that can be had for user experience designers to be exposed to the realities of business. I think there's an awful lot which is focused around either the extreme accessibility end of really following hard on like heuristic analysis and thinking about how people interact with things and making it accessible. And we need to be doing those things. They are really important. But if you're starting from scratch, particularly with a startup, if you have those principles and values right from the beginning, it shouldn't be a constant effort to check them because they are part of the foundations, which means that you can quickly start to think a little bit beyond just touchpoint interfacing. And I think that's very much where that product manager or product owner sort of responsibility comes into play. And I think it's quite interesting that you're in this position where you have this hybrid role, and I wonder how common it actually is with startups within those early years, because you just don't have the budget, right, to be able to have people who are dedicated to just that role.
Right.
Have you met any other people that have got this similar sort of hybrid responsibility?
I don't think I've personally met any. I have come across Melissa Perry. Like all of her stuff is great. I came across her on UX podcast, I think, and she has a book called Escaping the Build Trap.
Yeah, which is definitely one of my favorite books of last year, for sure.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, so I assume others exist in this role since she speaks about them, and she is one, or at least she has been. But I haven't met any. So
let's talk about the general kind of roles and responsibilities that you have then within this hybrid role, because you were saying, so you're effectively the solo designer for your product, and you have a development team as well. Are you constitute as being part of that development team? Are you set up as a product team? What's the actual shape of Bolstra?
So we're all set up as the product / R&D team.
Okay.
It's we call ourselves both, kind of alternating days, whatever strikes us as being the thing that day. That is the CTO, our senior developer, our integrations engineer, and me. And all three of them, the integrations engineer is largely focused on integrations, but he has touched some product stuff on the back end. And the CTO and the senior designer are both very much like front lines in the trenches development of the product.
So does that mean that you actually collaborate quite closely with one another on a like a day-to-day of how things are getting built out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that close relationship with the development team has been one of the great things that's come from being a UX team of one. Like it kind of necessitates building good relationships and good collaboration with the developers that you're working with. I'm a big fan of the perspective that everybody working on the product or influencing the product is designing it, whether they're doing it consciously or not. That means they should very much be made a part of the process, and you should collaborate with them, not just hand off to them.
Where's the cutoff line with your team of like between you and the developers of like what is your contribution? At what point does it stop? Do you do like front end code, or is it just sort of developing stuff on paper?
I do a little bit of front end actually. We that was just a new thing as of last fall, really, when we transitioned fully to Bolstra rather than North Quad. But one of the things that our CTO was new at that point, and as was our senior developer, so kind of a fresh start. There was some consistency with the integrations engineer who'd come on a little bit later as a Bolstra employee rather than a North Quad employee before the split. But so there was a whole transition period of just getting used to a new development team, onboarding them to the product itself, and just coming to terms with where we were at as a product and establishing some processes as a team. And one of the things that became clear during that period was that it was oftentimes easier for me to hop into a locally running instance and just make styling tweaks essentially myself, rather than trying to explain to them and then they would go off and do it.
Yeah,
that's pretty much the limit of my effectiveness as a developer.
Sure.
Very, very much visual front end style tweaks, but it is stuff that I could do effectively, and in the same time that we could have a conversation about it, I could just make the change.
What kind of challenges do you face with that constant day to day and the business of usual of, there's this sort of impression that often comes across with startups that every single day you have to be churning out something. Like it's just the train is continually running. But at the same time, if with your UX hat on, even with the product manager, end of that responsibility that you've got is you need to be thinking about where you're going as well, right? So how do you balance the sort of the time and your energy as to what's happening right in front of you versus what's coming up?
So part of it is just getting comfortable with gear switching.
Right.
That was very much something that I had to do working for Northquad for the first year of my career. Jumping not only between different approaches to design relevant to a product, but jumping between two completely different products and two completely different companies. That was it was just very much a trial or baptism by fire kind of situation where I had to figure out how to do it effectively, or I wouldn't get anything done. So comfort doing that and switching gears very quickly is the first part of that. The next, I think, is being like I think it's prioritization, not only of what to do as a product, but what is most important to work on at any given moment. I mean, there's a constant balance between wanting to go deep on everything and wanting to stay ahead of the work. And I don't necessarily want to pretend that I've found the perfect balance. It's a constant effort to stay on top of it. If development is currently building something out, I could be tweaking style guidelines. I could be designing the next part of what they're going to be working on, or I could be structuring some research to evaluate whether what we're currently working on is going to do the trick or not. And there are different answers to that depending on what stage we're at in bringing it to the users. That weighing kind of happens all the time.
Yeah.
And I just kind of try to make the call, jump onto the thing that will be most important at any given moment.
What about what's happening with the things that you've previously done? So do you also look at like measurement strategy? Like what's your process at the moment for you release a feature, or however you kind of like to describe the work you're doing? How do you know that it's had impact before you start running ahead into the next thing?
Right. So part of the last better part of 2 years to begin with has been trying to implement any user research practice at Bolstra. That's I'm lucky enough that in the customer success space, they are already very much in the mindset that communication should be happening between customers and companies. So that was a very helpful foundation to build off of. But that being said, the initial product was never designed with any user testing or any formal user research interviews or anything like that. And that's been something I've been trying to mature in my time working with Bolstra.
Right.
But the process that we've fallen into essentially looks like taking a sampling of 5 to 8 maybe users at a variety of our customers, from a variety of our customers, and doing generative research with them to investigate problem spaces and just understand where they're at and where they would like to be at. That's become the norm for going into any large project. Building in evaluation is something that's still very much in progress, but one of the things that that's starting to look like is building in kind of an early access period to supplement what I already did with usability testing and other evaluative research methods with a handful of customers during the development process,
right,
and the prototyping process before that. So this is kind of building in a more formal time closer to the end of the project to allow wider access, facilitate feedback, and do many more one-on-ones to dive deep with essentially looking at how's this working? Is it benefiting you? Where is it not? etc.
What's been the main challenge for you with recruiting participants for your user studies? Because I appreciate with any given startup, you could actually have relatively low numbers of customers, and although your users might be a little bit wider. So how have you found that?
That has actually been far from a challenge, really. Our customers are themselves customer success managers. The product is for them in managing their work, managing their accounts, and kind of doing the right work at the right time.
So they've got the right mentality straight off the bat that they know that it's about what they put in is ultimately going to have an impact on the value and the quality of what they get from you.
Yeah, they're like it's interesting getting insight into the kind of product design maturity at their companies, as well as from our perspective. But they are very much comfortable and frequently communicating with a variety of their own customers and with us. So it's very much a natural thing for them.
Right. And how have you found the most effective ways of gathering that feedback? Like, what methods have you been using for that?
Part of our approach in generative research is to have just open-ended feedback sessions from time to time with all of our customers. Their approach in getting that to us essentially looks like opening things up to their entire team and facilitating that feedback internally, and then bubbling it up in one session to us. That's one way. Another way is really just ad hoc communication between them and our customer success team, because they're talking on a weekly basis, just about whether it's here's how you use this part of the product, or here are best practices for achieving this thing. But it's very much a continual conversation with everybody week to week, and bringing in our customer success team to basic user research practices, open-ended questions, good listening. That's been an extremely helpful tool to really utilize that frequency of contact that I wouldn't have time for, in addition to the product management and the design.
And how do you capture this feedback? Have you decided to sort of go with a particular platform for sort of managing it? Because I can imagine that you could quickly end up with just this wall of noise and not really knowing how to prioritize what's in it.
Yeah, that's certainly been a problem. It's very much still a work in progress, trying to really find a home for those insights and a good structure for bubbling up the most important parts of them, I guess. One of the projects I've been working on as just kind of an internal resource has been basically a wiki hosted on Gitbook, that not only documents things like the changelog, the immediate release plan, the roadmap, documentation on certain areas of the product, how they behave, a little bit of technical information on how they work. But it's starting to become a place where I can also bubble up and structure research insights. Whether it's largely at the moment survey results that we've run, just because those are a little bit better suited to aggregation and shorter form content to demonstrate. But the goal is to turn it into a really holistic window into all of the product team's process and all of the research that work is driven from, for anybody in the organization to have access to, not just our product team.
So it's an interesting point that you make there, that it's the desire to sort of share it with everybody, because my immediate thought was, if you're the product manager and you're the UX designer, so you're ultimately the the product designer, holistically, who is the audience for your insights? Because as UX designers, we'd quite commonly be producing them to give to the product owner and the product managers to go, here's how to inform, where you're going to go next. But that's you. So do you feel like it's that you're just writing this for yourself at the moment? Or how are you utilizing those insights? Is it something that's informing the conversations that you have with the product team?
Yeah. So I think that if I were only writing it for myself, I would be making a mistake. It's very much something that I think needs to be an open part of the conversation with any internal stakeholder, and especially in our development team. And that's really aligned with having tried to make them very much a part of the design process. And them making me a part of the technical design process as well, since that has just as many implications on the user as it does in the other direction. So I think it's really important to ensure that anybody influencing or working on the product not only understands what we're doing, but understands why. Providing that transparency into the research, I think, is one of the ways that will be especially effective in demonstrating that. Bringing people into usability testing and conveying those results, even when they're not brought into it.
Do you find that the information that you're gathering from your customer feedback loops and surveys and things are really just helping you address the stuff as is today? Or does it provide you with opportunities for the future?
I think it does. It very much influences where we're going with the product roadmap and how we're thinking about things. The great thing about our customer base, I guess, our user base, is that it is how open they are in sharing insight into their own problem spaces. We one of the things we try to do as an entire company is to make our customers feel like partners rather than just kind of recipients of what we're working on, and that the openness that comes from that has been extremely helpful at looking at what are we going to be working on in 6 months? What might we be working on in a year? What problems are left to be solved? That's actually a core part of how we've moved to defining the product roadmap, not around features, but around problems to solve or at least move the needle on.
It certainly is. I think it is quite an indicator in the maturity, or not necessarily, that's probably a little bit of an unfair way of describing it, but the way in which company founders think of things is it that they look at things as features or as identifying these like key areas that are areas that you want to be able to enable others to do things in that is a little bit easier than before, right? And I think there's quite a bit reference of that in the build trap as well.
Yeah, there definitely is, and that's the build trap is. It was interesting in reading that because I wasn't quite sure whether certain existing processes at Bolstra landed us in the build trap or whether we were just kind of bordering on it. But moving from defining roadmap as features, which was traditionally very much the case, was an intentional move to try to ensure against that. I think that a lot of our looking back historically at projects that have been run to build Bolstra and bring value to the customers, we've gotten lucky historically with landing on features that do very much benefit the user, but the practice itself of deciding what to do, I think, was in some ways unsustainable. Like, we didn't want to keep relying on choosing choosing those features and getting lucky and moving the needle a little bit. We wanted to be more intentional about what we're doing and how we're ensuring that we're doing it well.
Yeah. I guess an element of it is that you need to be producing things for your products and your services that also reflect the values and the mission of the business, right? Otherwise, you do run that risk of that you might not be building to scratch your own niche, but there's that potential that because you have your beta users, your early access users, they're going to influence you too much. And I suppose, do you have any challenges with that, of like making sure that you've got a balance of where you're getting your data from and who you're getting it from?
Yeah, so I think the discussion I have with who to run research sessions with is always one that happens with the customer success team, just because they're on the front lines of that communication. They can reach out and make the first invitation, set up the call, and provide more insight for me as to who might be best to talk about certain issues with. Like who's been having X problem, Y problem, that kind of thing. And there is kind of a tendency to want to talk to the people who are happiest with the product. And that's something I've tried to balance out, because historically speaking, we were at kind of a place with the product where if the team buys in and uses Bolstra, their lives will be better. But it doesn't necessarily on the individual level help them with their day-to-day work. So that's been one of the things that we've been trying to readdress, to kind of do both, like remove the friction that is making it an inconvenient part of the day and make that buy-in process easier.
So it's the challenge of that you've potentially already got advocates. So when you go out to them to ask them about things, they're going to give you perhaps a rosier picture than what someone else might.
Yeah, in some ways. I think it's less the rosier picture and more just not as deep of insight into the biggest problems. The communication across the board is always open and honest, but like if for instance we're only talking to the team that has bought into it, that very much likes Bolstra as a kind of an information management product and platform, then we're not getting insight so much into the struggles of adoption, the struggles of buy-in, and the lack of getting certain people to that aha moment of, oh, this is what can really help me out.
Listening to you talk about your understanding of your customers and the way in which you have approached developing the UX practices within this startup, it makes me wonder what you think about the opportunities that are out there in careers at the moment, and what your expectations were when you were leaving school and leaving education. You've had this great fortune of being able to find somewhere really interesting to work, but what was your impression of what this might have looked like somewhere else?
I feel like I entered the industry from a standpoint of having shockingly few expectations about what it would be like. I knew I wanted to be solving problems, and I wanted to make quality user research practice a core part of that, because I think that's how it best happens. That's how you best facilitate moving the needle for somebody's problem. Understanding it deeply, understanding them deeply, and building something that you think will help with that, help them with one of their problems, and testing it to make sure it does. That was really the core of what I expected. And I think that the lack of formal or at least traditional design background may have contributed to that kind of lack of expectation, and also potentially been helpful in kind of incentivizing me to build out the practice myself rather than just plugging into something that's already there.
Right. So in some respects, you've had the ability of the complete freedom to just figure this stuff out for yourself, rather than that sense of, I need to go and get a grad job, and then that's what I'm going to be doing, and then I'm on this particular track, and then that kind of leads to this sort of space. Because I guess that's what a lot of us expect, or assume is the way in which we're supposed to conduct ourselves. What would be your advice for people that are in that similar position to you once were, where you're about to leave education, you're heading off into this world of commercial design in one flavor or another, or research, and looking at these opportunities around? We've got these big, massive organizations, big brand names that we can all potentially go and apply for internships and at Facebook and Google and all the rest of it. There's agency life, there's in-house in pre-established organizations, and then there's this world of startups. And I think that people quite easily just ignore it because they feel like they need to go somewhere to build up their chops before you can do that. And I think you're kind of proving that doesn't necessarily have to be the case.
Right. Well, so I'm definitely grateful that I've been able to find that startup environment where I've been able to have that freedom to build out the processes myself, have that freedom to really influence the product at a deep and broad both level, I guess, a T-shaped kind of product influence. I think that which path you go very much depends on what you want out of a first job experience. Like I'm extremely grateful for the chance I had to just dive headfirst into it and learn by doing, learn from I guess less traditional sources within the company, development, customer success, the product manager at North Quad when I worked there. And just it was important for me to get the chance to just dive into every bit of the process, and that kind of broad experience and interdisciplinary team dynamic. But it certainly had its challenges and its downsides too. Like if you, for instance, if somebody doesn't see that advocacy for user research practice and UX design processes as being a core interest, then I'm not sure that I would recommend going into a startup, because if there's nobody there running the discipline already, you need to be that advocate. You need to be able to sell the business side stakeholders, the developers, that this is the best way to design products and bring products to market. And that's change. That's institutional change, and that's an incredibly drawn out and difficult process to try to take a company through. Like you can't if you're expecting to go into a startup and immediately be running these things, then that might not be the case nine times out of 10. It's something that you have to build.
I guess it then means that you need to quickly start to ask the right questions and identify what type of people are running the show, right? When you're going for those interviews, whether it's in some kind of screening call beforehand, or sounding them out and seeing what they write about and things like that, to get an idea of whether that belief is already present in the way that they work.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that a lot of the time, the good thing is that a lot of the time that will look very much like normal interview questions that one might ask to see whether an existing design or product team is practicing those things. Like who came up with the last feature that you shipped, the last big development effort? How do product decisions get made? When was the last time you talked to a user? Things like that. I think a lot of the time, whether you're talking to founders, C-level people, or existing members of a design team, those are quite often similar questions.
Yeah, so getting an understanding of like what their current working practices are, or what they're trying to move to, I guess, like in your case of, there was a desire to go in a particular direction, so let's find the people that we want to be able to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And it might be like other questions might be like, if you're the first designer, why are you hiring a designer? What are your expectations for what design is and what I'll be working on? Yeah, it's definitely an interesting balance of, if you're the first designer, there probably are no formal existing design practices, but there's still some expectation that you can dig into of the scope of the role, what you'll be responsible for, and how they're thinking about design as a discipline.
Yeah, right. Because that's kind of why I asked you the question earlier about how far do you take your deliverables? Because when I think about all of the project boards or job boards that I regularly look at to see what's going on in the market, I still see the most common thing within startups that are of a size of like 2 people to 50 is the UX/UI designer.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you start to dig in a little bit more into what's going on there, actually what their expectations are is still of that they need someone to design the app. And that's not what we're setting out to do. So have you experienced anything like that with the previous things that you've been working on, of that being the impression of what you do?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that initially at North Quad, I was really hired into a role that was largely based around visual design. Like the existing idea of what UX/UI was kind of superficial, I guess. Not to minimize the importance of good visual design and visual designers, but it wasn't the full stack, for lack of a better word, of UX. And at North Quad, that growing out of that looked like taking on what they defined as product management responsibilities. And going into Bolstra, it was kind of a continuation of that. And really, like, at the end of the day, 90% of what they might traditionally think of as product management, I think of as part of good design practice, or good design advocacy, or just good decision making. But it's been a continuous process, growing and maturing out of that more narrow idea of design, and trying to advocate for that throughout the organization.
So how do you do that on a personal level, being that you've obviously got great people to work around you with, but in terms of continuing to refine your capabilities and your skills, and further developing what's going on there in design, how are you approaching that?
So part of that is access to great online communities like the Designer Hangout. That's been such a fantastic resource and community to be a part of. Just the access to, what is it now, 15,000 some designers all around the world, all varying areas of the design picture, varying levels of experience. It's just such a great, it's just a great, like, it's a 24/7 design conference.
That's true. There are definitely times where it feels like that as well. And there's I think there's so many channels. I think we made a smart decision with that community quite early on to go with the approach of, rather than having a big flood of stuff in a handful of channels, to make really small ones so that the conversation can be very succinct. And that, I think, is a huge help. So even the ones where you have conversations that there might only be one every couple of months, it means that it's really focused and you can go back to it quite easily and look at what people said.
Definitely.
It's definitely a great community to be part of. So that's giving you access to
to people to kind of like sound out ideas with on the fly. I think one of the challenges that I've always found with this sort of emergence of basically like chat room communities is kind of how I see it. Anything that's running on Slack is meant to be real-time chat. Is that it's really about posing a question in the instant. So at that point in time, this is what I'm thinking about, and I kind of want to get an answer. What about the sort of slightly things that take a little bit more of a gestation? How do you build your knowledge up in those spaces?
So I would say two of the other major components are the occasional actual design conference. There's a great one called Midwest UX that just rotates around Midwestern cities here in the US. That's been a fantastic yearly thing to kind of dive deeply into the discipline and examine things that I might not be doing yet or might not be doing well yet, and take the time to think intentionally about how I bring those things into my process. The other big one is reading a lot. Articles online, books, just developing shelves and shelves of a little design library, and reading broadly outside of that too. Some business books, some sociology, psychology, just human-centered reading, essentially.
Right. Are there any out of the sort of away from the classic design publications, your O'Reilly books and the whatnots, that you would recommend to people as being a good read?
Yeah, there have to be, right? Like I have they're all downstairs. Whether I can think of them is a very, very different question.
Well, one of my favourites is, and I was really chuffed to discover, I went for coffee with someone recently and they said, I've just started reading this book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rummel. And I was quietly thinking, yeah, I know, I recommended it to you about a year ago, because it is definitely one of my favourite. And it's like, you've got to read this book. It's so great. That's definitely up there for me as still being one of the best, because it's really the bad strategy end of it is the best part of like all of these big campaigns and things, military campaigns and scientific stuff, and just talking about failure in a really great way.
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Good strategy, bad strategy?
Good strategy, bad strategy. It's one of the best books ever written. And my favourite story in there is about how the Mars, the buggy for going to the moon was eventually engineered and designed, and it's one of the best reads ever.
That's really cool. I'll add that to the list.
Yeah, there you go.
So I've come up with two, thinking feverishly about what I've read. One of them is it does get recommended in design circles. Have you read Set Phasers to Stun?
I think I have. Is it written by the same person that wrote Make It So?
I'm not sure. This one is essentially a collection of case studies about these horrendous disasters that have happened, and it was quite dark seeing how many of them end with "and then they all died." I did not expect that going into the book, but it's kind of an engineering focused book, like design of the manual repressurization hatch on a Soyuz space capsule, like an emergency shutdown system, I guess, of a nuclear reactor, a radiation therapy machine for killing tumors. It's all kinds of stuff like that. But it's very much how bad design or untested design, at least, have these enormous potentials for harm.
Awesome. We will add that to the list. So the full title of that is Set Phases on Stun and Other True Tales of Design, Technology and Human Error.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. What's your second?
Second one is the Burnham Plan of Chicago.
Okay.
That one was actually recommended to me at Midwest UX in Chicago last year. But it's just a collection of the 1909 or 1910 plan, I think, of how to take Chicago essentially from this place of chaotic traffic and totally dysfunctional transportation systems, like miles of industrial mud on the lakeshore, just this kind of nasty place, into the thriving big city that it became. So it's kind of a little glimpse into really what is design thinking processes from 1910. Like they set up a little workshop on top of a building that had a view of the entire lakefront and all of the disastrous traffic patterns below, and really designed intentionally with like civic and cultural and I guess kind of infrastructural engineering design, a better future for it. And that's like that plan is responsible for things like Wacker Drive, Navy Pier, a lot of the big like staples of Chicago that are still around today.
Right, that sounds like a really awesome read. Let's just talk about kind of where you see things going in the future. So, what's your plan for further developing the design capability over the next couple of years? Where do you want to go with this? Is it to remain being the solo person? Do you have ideas of perhaps expanding the team?
Yeah, so I one of the definite big goals of what I'd like to continue to do at Bolstra is to grow the design and eventually product management team. I think that there are a number of ways that I'm structuring my time and process to facilitate good outcomes as a team of one, but it's also definitely in no way a sustainable thing for Bolstra's growth, for my own growth at some point. So that's definitely one of the big goals: grow that design team and really create something that will live past my time at Bolstra.
And what do you think the skill sets are that are required at this kind of stage within a startup? If you were thinking of adding in individuals into that, what do you think has the biggest impact?
That's a great question.
Like if you were hiring for you, like as the designer of one, if you were one of those, that CTO, that founder, what type of person would you be looking for
to be that team of one, or to?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I think the big thing for me would be like you want somebody who wants to be a generalist, because you need to be touching on all kinds of sub-disciplines in that kind of role to succeed at delivering what needs to be delivered. Probably need to do some level of visual design. You probably need to have like your more traditional UX-y things, task flows, journey maps, things like that. I think you also would really want somebody who is able to run effective user research at some level, because that's like that. If you can only have one thing, like that should be the thing that you aim for. Somebody who knows how to listen, who knows how to facilitate good conversation with somebody, to draw insights from somebody else's experience. Because otherwise you're going to be kind of designing blind or in a vacuum. And I think it's the hardest thing to do without and still deliver a good product with positive outcomes. But I think you also need that very generalist view to kind of help translate that from insight to a plan of action and development.
There's definitely a sense of that, right, in startups. You cannot just leave things sat on the fence. It is that, using the IDEO analogy, it's about going from insights to action, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to be part of that journey of delivering it and seeing what happens at the end.
Yeah, certainly. And it's, I think too often startups make I think it's a mistake, but also if there's no existing good holistic understanding of design, no existing exposure to the discipline, then it's hard to make anything other than a mistake doing it. Like it's a hard problem to fix without like widespread education on what it is, what it means, what the tools are. But what you see all the time, just in online communities, locally, wherever, is that gravitation towards just the actionable artifacts of design, like the mock-ups, the visual design, the style guides, design systems. And those are all important tools, but they're the artifacts, not the process.
That's a really lovely point to finish on. Miles, thank you so much for taking part today in the UX Coach podcast. It's been really great having you.
Yeah, it's been great to talk. Thanks for having me.
There you have it. I'm sure you'll all agree, another fantastic episode, another amazing conversation. If you are new here, you can subscribe to this podcast through iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Acast, anywhere that you get your feeds from. You can also sign up to our monthly newsletter featuring the best posts from around the world on digital careers and practices. We really want to give a voice to the unheard stars of this field. I think that that's you. And if you'd like to join this conversation and share your experiences with everyone, then please get in touch with us at our website, theuxcoach.com. I'll be back in a few weeks with another guest, and we'll be talking about more experiences and how they've navigated digital design and the new career opportunities ahead of them. I'll see you then.